Welcome to the virtual event Addressing the Crypto Question, produced by the P3 Network. We are a convening force that brings leaders from both the private sector and the public sectors together. Thank you again to our sponsors who help make this possible. This webinar's focus is on the rule of law, and the series is to provide thought leadership for Congress and the Crypto Technology Advisory Group, which the P3 Network's chairman is leading. I am your host, Adrian Ewell, and I am one of the founders of the P3 Network. The series has leaders from both the public and private sectors. Today's webinar, we have Rachel Epstein, currently head of government affairs at IOG, formerly on the legal teams of Hedera, Hashgraph, and Consensus, and was a research assistant on the book Blockchain and the Law, The Rule of Code by Aaron Wright and Primavera de Filippi. Hey, Rachel, how are you doing?
Hey, Adrian. I just want to say thank you to P3 for organizing and producing valuable educational content and thought leadership for the Web3 industry and beyond. Thank you, Congressman Sessions, for your time today, as well as your passionate efforts on the Hill, trying to bring sense to many of your colleagues. And thank you to Greg and Hailey. I'm truly honored to discuss the rule of law and blockchain with such brilliant lawyers as yourselves. And yeah, looking forward to a really interesting conversation.
Thank you, Rachel. Your advice, your expert advice will be much appreciated. We also have Dr. Greg Guedel, Chief Legal Officer at Fluent Finance. He helped establish a Native American Special Economic Zone in the United States and is a very active member of the Crypto Technology Advisory Group, otherwise known as CTAG. Hey, Greg, tell us a little bit about yourself. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. This is an amazing group. I echo Rachel's comments, and I'm delighted and honored that I have a chance to be here at this time, which is such a formative time for regulation in finance as we're moving to the future and trying to plot a great pathway there. So I'm very excited for our discussion today.
Thank you, Greg. We also have on Hailey Lennon, who is a partner at Brown Rudnick. She is a regulatory analyst for Forbes Crypto, formerly on the general counsel at Coinbase and Silvergate Bank, and has been on numerous crypto-related podcasts, providing thought leadership. Hello, Hailey. How are you doing?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I agree with what the others have said. This is going to be a great discussion and really honored to be a part of it.
Thank you. And of course, the Honorable Congressman Pete Sessions, who has provided over 2 decades of leadership in Congress, supporting a stronger America, both in technological innovation and strong legislative laws. Particularly, the congressman has led and unified the discussion around digital assets and blockchain technology. He is a leader of the Crypto Technology Advisory Group and a supporter of the P3 Network goals. Hello, Congressman. How are you doing?
Adrian, thank you very much. What a great opportunity to be together for people who want to know that there's progress in these conversations. There's information in these conversations. And Greg, as part of our technical working group, brings together knowledge from the industry. Certainly Rachel would and Hailey would also, in the interest of us building what we want and wish to become available for billions of people, not millions, of the stability of this interest. But it is important as we do that we understand the laws, the regulations, the rules, and the putting together of these opportunities. So you're going to hear me say today, thank you to the team who sees piece parts of not just what we might call the blockchain or of the industry, but actually of ideas about where we want to go. And I'm very excited about being here today, and thank you very much.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that was created for the CTAG, was for creating a balance between innovation and regulation. But
well, that's true. We want to err on the side, if you think about a number of things in their infancy. We didn't want regulation to kill innovation. We
Yeah.
don't want regulation to kill the innovation, the freedom, the opportunity to grow what might be this industry. And so the way you kill it best is let's just have somebody regulate the stuffings out of it. And we believe that there's a strong balance between that responsibility and then knowing what we ultimately want to get from this. We want to get this to be to where it becomes powerful and a part of our daily use and life. I've got children, young boys, who want this to be a guiding light for them in their future. I think we've proven that we can mess up the dollar very rapidly. We can mess up the infrastructure of whether it's Social Security, whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, whatever systems they are. When the government gets in, it causes a disruption of what the original intent was stated to be. This intent should be nimble. It should be market oriented. It should be the stability should be based upon the market conditions. But once you then add rule of law, which is necessary and which we want to get to, we have to make sure that that balance is there.
Definitely. And that's where so when you're talking about the rule of law, you have a huge challenge when putting in regulations. What are the challenges that regulators are dealing with? Because blockchain is so different from any past thing prior to the internet, prior to traditional finance. Like, how do you implement, what are some of the challenges that regulators are dealing with?
Well, I would say to you that much of the challenges that they want to have is based upon traditional thinking. When in fact, people who would choose to come and be a part of this new currency do so based upon their knowledge and study and understanding of exactly where the ball is today. And that is that, yes, we do have certain components that are necessary. Know your customer. Whoever you go to is going to want to know who you are and to know enough about you to where we do not allow fraudulent accounts, nor do we want necessarily bad people. But in that process, then the rest of it, the government looks at, we've got all these agencies that pick apart a pie. Some want to know about your financial information. Some want to know about your financial standing. They want to know what your blockchain is built with. They want to come in and gather pieces and parts and data. The Securities Exchange Commission would want to get involved based upon what we say, what this product is. So there are a lot of things that are piece parts, and that's why we're doing what I would call measure 3 times, saw once. We are trying to get in a professional atmosphere, experts like these 3 or 4 other people that we have on today, including yourself, Adrian, to talk about it and understand what is the promise from this. And that I am involved because I believe there's a promise in this. I believe that there is an advantage to this. I believe there's a future for this. I believe that people will benefit from their association with not only long-term attribution, but believe in this as an American value. And that's what I'm trying to build.
Definitely. That's awesome, Pete. Hailey, you had some ideas on following up on some of what Pete's saying about what the challenge that regulators are dealing with and what is the purpose of the rule of law?
Yeah, I think I agree with what's been said. The difficulty is that this is such a new technology, and oftentimes the space is moving faster than the regulators, because the way blockchain technology and this industry works is such an open source, decentralized way of innovation. And I agree that there are topics that, even since I worked at Silvergate Bank, the focus was and should be consumer protection and efforts against, preventing money laundering and terrorist activity. I think most people in the industry can agree that those two goals matter and should remain. But I don't think that the industry or many of the regulatory bodies that look at the space have really thought, how do we most effectively get to those two goals? And maybe the laws as they're written being applied to the new technology isn't the best way. And so I do think these conversations are really important. And to what Congressman Sessions said, there are so many different regulators that touch the space. And I found it interesting as an attorney in this space that regulators tend to define these cryptocurrency or blockchain projects in a way that does give them jurisdiction over it. So if you look at FinCEN, they're pretty clear that most of this activity can constitute money and money transmission. You go over to the IRS and they're defining it as property that is taxed with capital gains. Then we have, sort of the battle or struggle between the CFTC and SEC on jurisdiction of these different tokens that I'm sure we'll talk more about today. Yep. So when you have all these different agencies with different goals, these discussions are really helpful, and I hope that we can dig into these topics today.
I think
Hailey, one thing I wanted to say is it also depends how you want to be defined. And when you fit yourself into one bucket, then is that the right bucket to be in?
Right.
And that's an important part that I think people like you and Greg and for sure Rachel do recognize. We need to know how we define ourselves in law.
Right. Yeah. I mean, definitions matter. Following on what both Hailey and Congressman have said, there is no common taxonomy. How can we create laws if we can't define cryptocurrency, in a certain way across different U.S. regulators? Let's step beyond regulators. Let's look at the legislation. That's even in Congress right now, the 70+ bills talking about blockchain technology. I've seen different definitions for a stable coin, for crypto and digital asset. And then when you're looking at an international level, I still jumble VASP versus CASP versus DASP. What's included, what's not included, or unhosted wallets included, are they not? I mean, this is hugely problematic and creating a lot of uncertainty and hardship for complying and upholding the rule of law. And it's a challenge that's, I think, only getting worse. But that's why, these conversations need to happen. I think another challenge to the regulators and people on the Hill, these are really complicated topics. I mean, you're talking about oracles, mining, staking. It's confusing. And if you don't understand it, you're dependent on the headlines in the media, which are mostly fear mongering, talking about the latest hack or, fraudster or this or that. And it's scary. So you just think it's bad. But technology is neutral, can be used for good or bad. And there's a huge, still years later, while there's, more membership in the blockchain caucus and more, people on the Hill that do understand, there's still so many that don't. So the education, the discussions are still, more important than ever, especially, this regulatory environment and where we are in the election cycle and whatnot.
Yes, the rule of law must take into account that it can't stop the innovation, but at the same time, it's like regulators get freaked out and then they want to over-regulate and destroy the technology. So there's a fine balance, and I think we're all on the same page on that. But Greg, did you have any follow-up on that?
I agree that the real challenge is information for regulators. There is rarely a time that the law is not a step behind business and industry that's trying to develop something new. But I think we've rarely seen an industry that is developing, evolving, changing as rapidly and frequently as digital finance. And one of the things that is so crucial about the session we're having today and why we need more of these is most of the people who know the most detail about what these systems are, how they work, what the benefits are not lobbyists. They're not advocating to regulators and spending time on that. They're actually the people who are building these systems. So it's crucial that we get real technical information in front of the people who have the power to make the regulations that are going to guide this. I attended the House committee hearing on stablecoins a few months ago, which was very interesting because you got a very broad set of views from across the country, the legislatures from all 50 states. You were hearing very different points of view. And one thing that you didn't hear much of, and that I think in particular Congressman Sessions has his finger on the pulse of, that to me is what's needed when it comes to regulation, is you have to have a philosophy at the regulatory level. The government needs to look at this the same way we looked at the space race and going to the moon. We need to think about this not as something that is just transactional or something that we've got to watch out for, but we have to think about America's place in the global economy and how digital finance gives us the opportunity to maintain leadership. And you read the financial papers, you read anything you want, you see many people around the world that don't share our values would like to see America not in that global leadership position. And it's clear that what they are looking to do from an asymmetric point is utilize these digital technologies to try to move that needle. I think America's regulators, our Congress, our president, everybody needs to think about the opportunity point we are at now and fashion regulations, just as we've done in other industries that were of true strategic importance, that facilitate that set good guidelines, clear transparency rules, but allow us to be in the leadership position and not hold us back, which would allow other countries to take over that. So I'm hoping that that's a touchstone point for all of the people who are going to take a regulatory role, understand it in that view, and then build regulations to support that approach.
Yes, and what, as I said, this is, Congressman, you kicked this off wonderfully, and this question of creating a balance between regulation and innovation is exactly what you're talking about, Greg. We're putting, the moonshot, all these different things. We need to be at the forefront of innovation. So thank you. And I'm going to go on to that first question it was wonderfully answered by all of you. I'm going to go on to the next question I have for Hailey on decentralization, and with her vast experience in writing for Forbes, crypto, and other things. Hailey, as we're discussing, like, decentralization is now on a mass level with the internet. And so what does it mean? Why does it matter? And what does it even mean for the blockchain community?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's hard. I mean, like we were talking about earlier with definitions, this term decentralization has been around, from when I was at Silvergate, and Bitcoin was really the only cryptocurrency that existed and was out being used. And today we're seeing so many new iterations on that, whether it be the way a company conducts itself, the protocol level, whether it's something like a decentralized exchange, which is trying to allow the transactions and exchange without a centralized entity. So I think what for me, what decentralized really matters is especially in terms of how the SEC regulates the space. And I think that what we are talking about today in part is the need for definition, the ability for companies to innovate. And for companies to innovate, things have to be very clear. There has to be clarity in how the rule of law is applied to the space, and how regulators actually follow up with those laws. And so if we take the SEC as an example, I feel like there's been, just in terms of decentralization, the SEC regulates using the Howey test oftentimes, which defines what an investment contract is. And one of those prongs is a common enterprise. So in that way, decentralization goes right into the heart of how the SEC is looking at cryptocurrency and digital tokens, what is a security and what is not. But I found it interesting, there's been a lot of statements coming out from the SEC saying, we think that these exchanges are listing tokens that are securities, or there's been enforcement actions against projects that are allegedly securities under the securities law. But some of those enforcement actions have been sort of, in my mind, kind of at random, and there hasn't been sort of a full picture of how the SEC is going to regulate the space. If there are exchanges that are listing cryptocurrencies that are securities, they should be broker dealers. And these exchanges have been operating for a long time, not as broker dealers, without any issues or enforcement from the SEC for years. And so I think that decentralization matters, because when companies can become confident that they've reached that point, that they fall into a certain bucket or not, through decentralization and the use of their cryptocurrency, that gives projects that flexibility and clarity to innovate. And I don't think we have that now.
Yes. Oh, I was actually thinking about something someone, Scott Richards, told me about decentralization. The first, for instance, internet started, 99 to 2001. We had Napster, which is the first example of people sharing music online and a peer-to-peer form. And it was the first mass decentralization, which I thought was very interesting because, eventually they lost their license in 2001 and then Blockbuster took over. But now we have a decentralization as an ideology with blockchain across the entire world. And it's completely new to traditional finance. And this is something that, Congressman, you're probably dealing with, is the internet and the change. Decentralization means something different. But
well, it does. And as I'm sure Greg and not just Rachel is thinking, and Hailey, we may create a couple buckets and let you fit the one you want. And it's not picking who would be a regulator, it's picking what you want to look like and what you become. And so there becomes this need. We know there's a common set of information that will be somewhere, but I think that really gets down to then is the definition that I think Hailey really made in some context. How does government want to look at you? Not just what bucket do you want to be in, but how do they want to look at you? And I think the conversation was government tends to want to, as the SEC, they want you to fit in their bucket to regulate. So I think that these are conversations as we clarify the marketplace where we think we ought to be also with that overwhelming viewpoint. Let's let them grow. Let's let the consumer understand who they are. Well, now all of a sudden you get into somebody wants to make sure all the advice you give and whether that advice turned out to be wrong or not. So all of a sudden the CFPB wants to come in and be a part of a regulation. So we've got to understand what I call Venn diagram is going to look like. What's in, what's out, what's common. And this is where this conversation, I find it every week we do this, you bring up huge points of commonality that we're gonna have to put pen to paper, really have an understanding what it means if we call ourselves a security, what it means if we don't, what if we become something else? Do we have broker dealers? Don't we? Who are people that can hold information on behalf of the blockchain? They're out there too. So it's developing into a big industry that we need to also know, what do we want to be called? What do we want to be? And what would those consequences be?
Rachel, I want to say, I definitely think you have some follow-up from IOG and like what you think about all this.
Yeah, I think the congressman actually makes a really interesting point. First, Hailey's point about the definitions. I think for all of us being in the space, as long as we have I don't think it's any different from, 6 years ago to now. You ask a room of 10 people, what does decentralization mean? You're going to get probably 10 different answers. And that's a problem, right? The decentralization is foundational to this technology, and which is now, as you mentioned, Adrian, become this ideology as well. And so if there's no common understanding or definition as to what that is, it's hard to properly legislate and regulate. While, right now it's too much of a land grab for these regulators wanting more power and, having this new technology or aspects of it under their jurisdiction, kind of, missing the more important point, which is like, let's figure out what this means and come to a common understanding to create some, principle-based legislation. I think speaking to the information part component that the congressman talked about, I think this is really key. When we think about Hinman's speech and, kind of saying Ethereum, Bitcoin are sufficiently decentralized. I know there's a lot of hoopla around that, but, what I and us at IOG really believe that means is, at the point that it was evaluated, it was, decentralized, or rather there wasn't a policy consideration due to information asymmetry. Because if we're looking at the SEC, their regime is about information, disclosure, and accountability and transparency to protect investors and ensure market integrity. And where Ethereum was at that point, there are people who were entering into Web3, looking at Ethereum, weren't dependent on one entity for, all of its information. There were numerous ways to get information about the protocol, about ETH and whatnot. And so there wasn't a need, there was nothing that the, a disclosure regime that would do, that wasn't already being done. So I think that's an interesting way to think about decentralization is, connecting it to the information asymmetry, and then, what needs are there to, mitigate that and, for the benefit of consumers, investors, and, the integrity of our financial markets.
Speaking of benefits, like what are some of the, I just came to mind, what are some of the benefits that come from some of the work? You might know some stuff about Cardano, but what are some of the benefits as a decentralized autonomous organization? What are they able to do for foreign nations? Like, what does it allow?
Yeah, I think, well, it never turns off, right? You're not reliant on just one system where a server might go down and like, oh, okay, well, can't access that app right now.
Yeah.
You're looking at different time zones where it's a global technology with global use cases and global use and access. So, you're not reliant on an entity in America making updates, because you have entities all over APAC and Africa and Europe, contributing as well. So, it's again about, who are you relying on? What information is available? Is there that, central point of control where something can just be turned off, or, central point of reliance that I need to, get my information from just a single source? I think, those are what we look at, or we should be looking at.
I think that's what's so interesting to me about this concept of decentralization and how the industry operates, because at certain points as an attorney, when I'm interacting with regulatory agencies, my question is sort of, what is the end goal? Because a lot of these projects are so decentralized, are open source. So if you turn off some front end website, it can go on. And unrelatedly, we saw that with the Tornado Cash situation and OFAC recently, and how there can be sort of unintended consequences of not fully sort of seeing the collateral impact of an action. And so, that's one thing that came to mind. I guess the second thing I'd add is the comparison to the internet is interesting to me, because the internet is actually the first example that I personally started to understand the importance of sort of privacy and encryption, and not just from a personal level, but also from sort of a national security level. And so I think that it's important for us to also be keeping in mind, so there are different coins and projects, and some have more of a focus on privacy or this concept of an unhosted wallet, which is really a self-hosted wallet, the same as a wallet in your back pocket. And is there something inherently wrong with wanting some level of financial privacy? I don't think so. And I don't think that the regulators even think so, but sometimes there are also unintended consequences on that. Just this idea that wanting some sort of financial privacy, even with blockchain technology and the way transactions are recorded on the blockchain, that should sort of be some sort of alert to regulators. And there may be a way in which we need to better understand how encryption and privacy of Americans, transactions should be something that we protect and understand the importance of that level of privacy.
And then Hailey, then you get into a term, safety and soundness.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It keeps coming at us. And there's certain things about this which inherently have their characteristics, which is what makes it the freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I think that these conversations become more important. Safety and soundness for me always also is part of sort of our traditional financial system and banking system. And as banks and traditional finance are looking to get into this space more, the clarity here continues to increase in importance.
Well, let me tell you, I hate to wander out on this realm, but this is where then the things that have transpired that have been negative to this context come when it was used as an asset where there was credit given off of that. And as the inflation put pressure on the business money-making model, it put pressure off money that was as given as credit. A bank had to then engage in getting rid of that asset under safety and soundness issues. And so it caused, so to speak, a rush on the bank. And these are the things which come into tandem. And look, you're a Dallas girl. You've heard the word tandem. You understand the nuances of that, and the tandem that came about as a result of that collided with safety and soundness.
Right. Yeah, I mean, parts of regulation, like we spoke about earlier, come down to consumer protection, right? And when you're talking about individuals putting money into something or trusting someone with value, that those consumer protection aspects are extremely important. There's no way that, like you said at the beginning, for this to become used by billions of users around the world, that can't happen if there's not some level of really serious looking at how we reach some sort of consumer protection aspect of this, but in the most effective way possible. And my concern is that some of the, headline news and really sort of tragic things that have happened in the industry lately, those weren't prevented by the regulation. And maybe that's in a way because of how this industry functions and how the technology functions. But that's the struggle, right? There is a struggle there.
Talking about consumers and privacy, like privacy is, as Congressman said, it's one of the tenets of American freedom, that you have, that your individual liberties are protected and that your privacy is protected. So it's very important, the discussion you two are having. I'll switch over to Greg on what his follow-up thoughts are from Fluent Finance, which is a stable coin, and some of their ideas about decentralization.
Adrian, you noted the decentralization of the music industry, which brings to mind two other major American economic decentralizations in my lifetime, the airline industry and the telephone industry. It used to be that you only had on the airline side a couple of companies and you had to choose only between them. And when I was a kid, you made a phone call through one company, and that was AT&T. What we see in common between these major industry decentralizations is there are tremendous benefits to consumers when competition and innovation, and those two things are intrinsically linked, are introduced into a system that's otherwise kind of become stale as far as the players and their incentives. And what you get with competition is more choice as a consumer. And those choices are not going to be equal, at least not initially. And so the people and companies that are offering these choices have to offer something new, something better, something faster, and more value. And that, in fact, pushes the industry forward. And there's a virtuous cycle that can be created in that regard for consumer benefit. You get things for less cost, you get more opportunities to do the things that you're trying to do as an individual or a family or a business. So we can see historically that decentralization has typically produced some tremendous benefits for Americans individually and for our collective economy. That doesn't mean that there's no place for regulation. There certainly needs to be, in conjunction with that, a set of guidelines and rules that are clear to understand. They're not things that are designed to prevent innovation, but they are designed to set just a pathway that everyone can understand. The problems with decentralization without regulation means you might get a cheap airline ticket, but then you might also end up getting stranded in the middle of nowhere without your luggage and no recourse. Nobody sees that as being an ultimate plus, even if you had the ability to choose that. So what we're looking for is to balance those things. We're looking to have a set of rules coming from government that really benefit the American people. And part of that is the safety and security side, making sure that people are able to make informed choices and good choices. But at the same time, the innovation is equally important, because you can have something that's completely safe, but doesn't really meet your needs and doesn't adapt to life as it evolves going forward. And so looking at it from Fluent's perspective, providing a stable coin, we're trying to close some gaps that exist now that the entrenched financial players, the large commercial banks, are not doing anything about, and clearly have no interest in doing anything about, and in fact are going the wrong way. And just one quick example I'll give, there's a quiet crisis in America that has existed for generations, but currently, according to our Treasury Department, it's getting worse. And that is the disappearance of traditional commercial banks from America's rural communities, the farm towns, communities of color, Native American communities. Banks are closing up shop, moving out of those communities, and they're not coming back. We're at a point now where in many places, say, for example, where Congressman Sessions represents communities, you may not have a bank within 100 miles because the one that used to be there decided it's not profitable for them and their business model anymore. So they're going to shut down that brick and mortar branch. And once those are gone, they're not going to come back. So what do those people do? How do they get a mortgage to buy a home? How do they get business financing for a small business to create an income? There has to be something new that is replacing those traditional centralized financial entities that can reach the people who are not being served. The clear answer that we see now that exists today and is only going to grow is using digital technology. You may not have a bank in your community, but probably everybody there does have a mobile phone. And with some of the programs that have enhanced rural broadband and rural telecommunications, people in those outlying areas that are away from the urban financial centers can in fact connect in via the internet and be able to participate in the economy if they have a means to do so. The banks may not provide that, but we're trying to build systems like stable coins that can provide the means for people to do business transactions, to do family money transfers, all of the things that are fundamental to the American economy outside of our big cities, but are not happening now with the entrenched interests. And so decentralization provides the ability for innovative, fast-moving companies to fill those gaps and to provide services in a more equitable way than what is currently happening. And what we're hoping from the regulatory side is give us a good roadmap for how we can continue to do that, but make sure we can continue to bring innovation and ideas to reach the people who are not being reached.
Yes, and the unreached people, we need to protect those consumers because we can provide them a decentralized finance and it's more accessible to them. So to protect them, those protections that we need to put in place where traditional investment is not necessarily as accessible anymore. And I think that's what you're saying, is we need to, properly put in the rule of law so that this is an opportunity for them to grow, special economic zones and other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly the entrenched, typical traditional financial players see anything new as being a business threat. And so there may be lobbying that goes against that concept simply because it might take business away. But I really see it more as it's business they didn't seem to want in the first place because they weren't going out to service these communities and provide those opportunities to people. So let's make sure on the regulatory side that to the same extent you provide banks with the ability to conduct their business, we're providing the innovators, the digital financial providers, that same opportunity to serve the communities for which that's the only way they're going to be able to do financial transactions because they don't have a bank and they're not going to get one. So let's make sure that we've got a playing field that really is level, not just for the financial institutions or government regulators, but for all Americans to be able to participate in our economic opportunities.
Great. Do you have some follow-up on that, Rachel?
Yeah, I think absolutely it's about accessibility, information, transparency, but also definitely a need for standards. We've seen this year and actually past years, but especially this year, I'd say unprecedented amount of token bridge hacks and, and lots of money lost from the people who are, aspiring for exactly what Greg said, that level playing field. And it's really sad because a lot of this could have been mitigated by, by having industry standards on interoperability, measures and smart contracts standards. And, when we're talking also about other things like zero knowledge proofs and whatnot, there needs to be more public-private partnerships, whether with NIST or, other standards organizations to, really come together and create these standards because, standards, just like accurate and detailed information, are what protect consumers and users. And, they're that key to safety and soundness. I think another aspect, which, a lot of people have talked about, Charles Hoskinson has talked about it, Masari has written about it, is this need for a user bill of rights. And I think there's more of an obligation on our industry to really step up and really think about that, and not just a new feature, a new monetization, mechanism or whatnot, but really protecting the people that are helping the technology to be adopted and, hopefully continue. So yeah, these are other things I think that just need to be considered or should be.
Speaking of protection, the rule of law, Congressman, is really what you specialize in, how to protect Americans and give them the opportunity to have the best opportunity individually.
Well, that's right. And I think what Rachel just said has it's deep water there. And the deep water that really you go into is, once again, how you want to be seen, who accepts the responsibility, and what does the marketplace look like? Because you might be doing something over a transaction of a digital line You might be doing something, as has been discussed, about standards of encryption, standards of knowledge, standards of all these things. And how do you verify what you sent was received? I spent, which nobody cares about, but I spent 3.5 of my beautiful years at Bell Labs, what was the Bell Labs up in New Jersey, putting together switches that transmit data back and forth that had to come off of a standard to where people knew that it was an industry standard. It was not a different company doing what they wanted. And we ran into this in government when President George W. Bush was president. We got into all this trying to make sure we had technology at the doctor's office, in a hospital, where we had medical records. And we had a guy named David Brailer, who I'm sure he's a plenty nice guy, but he did not, in my opinion, gather together the concept of standards. And so the industry wanted to be their own. They wanted to be unique and different. And then all of a sudden, people couldn't talk to people. You couldn't find the pacemaker on somebody. So I think that what has been talked about here, this user bill of rights, which is not a new concept to me, but the way Rachel said it, is a concept of stability. What do we stand for? Who are we? What can we be counted on? And what is our responsibility and what is yours? And I'll be honest, Rachel, that's not news to me, but just good news to me about things which I need to include in my thinking. And that's almost up front. That's not at the end of this process. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Look, I could talk for 4 or 5 hours about this, but what I want us to do is to get there and for this to grow, and don't kill the baby in the crib.
Great. I totally agree. And that's what we're fighting for, as far as advocates for innovation, science, and development. I'm going to go to Hailey. Do you have a short follow-up on that?
I mean, everyone said it
Pretty
well,
well.
but I do think, I mean, it kind of goes back to the point I said at the very beginning. I mean, I think a Bill of Rights is really going to what it is as an industry that we want to prioritize. And so, you know, I had mentioned consumer protection and efforts towards ensuring that this industry isn't used for money laundering or terrorist activity. There's many other, you know, I think rights that would be in there, and more importantly, probably is those industry standards, because I just don't think we're seeing those. And when we do talk about underrepresented or unbanked communities or groups of people, if what we're trying to do is provide a superior financial system that those individuals or areas around the world have access to, then it needs to be superior, right? It needs to work and be reliable and function well. So, I think it's a great idea, and I think that regulators and congressmen, women are to the point where there's been a lot of education at the industry, and regulators and the government have learned together in many ways over the years, and I feel like things are coming to a head where it's really time to start, you know, putting pen to paper and sharing feedback with one another and talking about it.
You know, one final question for Rachel on the is technology is can be used in, as we're talking now, is be used in many different ways, and how do we regulate this? I mean, what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's a loaded question. There is no playbook or framework for preemptively or, you know, currently regulating nascent technology and new industries. So, you know, I just have some observations. I think something the US is doing to its detriment is viewing this technology, blockchain technology, through a financial lens, where yes, there is a huge financial aspect to it. And maybe that is the, first or, dominant use case right now, but we're missing a lot by just focusing on that and not, the supply chain, the, privacy preserving aspect, creating digital self-sovereign identities, self-custody, really empowering people in ways, that they've never been before. So that's a concern. I think, we're also, maybe not as, recognizing the fact that these tokens are software. It's a whole new asset class. Cryptocurrencies are akin to stem cells. I'm not smart enough to think of that. That is definitely from Charles Hoskinson, but I love that because, it's programmable software. It can be nearly anything at any time. What it could start as a security, morph into a commodity, go back to a security. This is unprecedented. No two cryptocurrencies are alike. Uses, functions, and features are different. So, and it varies depending on like what the Congress says. Who's holding it? What are they doing with it? What was the intent of, upon putting that token out there? It can be used for so many things. So, that makes it very hard to try to regulate. So, regardless of how it's labeled, and I think that's a problem, we're just trying to label things and, kind of missing the rest is, recognizing the US legislature has never, dealt with such an asset. Without cryptocurrencies, blockchain technology does not exist. It doesn't work. It is needed to fuel this technology. So it's, not, we can't look at it in these like, vacuums, right? Where, the SEC says it's a security, CFTC, it's commodity. At this point, it's this, at this is that, it's more than that. It's a component to this, bigger mechanism. Any regulatory goals should be, as we've all discussed, market integrity, appropriate safeguards for consumer and investor protection, and, all that good stuff. I think, also innovation and new technology makes specifics really hard, and therefore the focus should be, as, a lot of discussion has been around a principle-based approach. But, I keep questioning, what are those principles? Do we just rely on the core principles that the CFTC has put out there? Maybe there's, a need for FTC or CFPB principles, or should there be new principles? I think that's something, we throw around principle-based, approach, and then, well, what principles? Where's that discussion? I just think, principles-based is more flexible and is what needed, because it can adapt and evolve. And, depending, of course, on what those principles are. Looking at who regulates, what, I think there's more of there should be more of a role for the Department of Commerce, for the FTC, CFPB, NIST, especially when we were talking about standards and industry standards needed. And my last point is we're faced with a technological problem, and maybe there should be a little more exploration into a technological solution. And, there is, such a thing as regulatory technology or reg tech, and exploring how that could, be that, filler where places where maybe an SRO or a regulator isn't the right fit, maybe, implementing some type of reg tech instead, or supplementing it would be a good solution. So I think we just need a lot more out of the box thinking and, not approach this very black or white.
Great. As far as principles, I was asked all four of you to just say, what are the core regulatory principles you'd go by? Like I would say like transparency, accountability, fostering innovation, which would create effective regulation for digital finance. Like what would your principles or values in this process be? We'll start, Greg, for instance, where would you go?
But my touchstone is transparency. It's about understanding when you're looking at a particular system or opportunity or company as a consumer or a regulator, how am I going to interact here? You need to know real information. You need to have detail on what it is you're seeing and make decisions from an informed basis. So I feel there's a definite regulatory role to mandate the production of information. And you go to the grocery store, you can quickly compare two different kinds of soup just by looking at the label and see what those ingredients are and decide, is this good for me or is this not meeting my needs? That concept is very much ingrained in our economy, and there's no reason why it can't be effectively and efficiently applied to digital finance. And in so doing, you give regulators the ability to understand what different companies are doing and what their products or services offer. And then for the consumers, they get the chance to make the choice to decide, is this something that's going to work for me, for my financial goals, for my business needs, and have the ability to do that in a way where they are making choices that benefit them and that they feel they can rely upon. Certainly not having that, I think you run into problems in every other aspect that you're trying to regulate or deal with in growing a business. So I think transparency and the requirement for information disclosure needs to be fundamental to both the regulatory approach and to any sound business plan. If you're trying to create something that people are going to use effectively, that needs to be part of what you're building.
And Hailey, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree, transparency, and that goes in my mind to the consumer protection that we've been discussing. I mean, I think nuance is a word that comes to mind. There has to be pretty careful nuance in drafting regulation or applying regulation. And that's very difficult in this space, as we've talked about, because the space moves quickly, different things take on different forms. Regulators have even said that projects can sort of change forms. So, you know, the nuance, we've maybe started to scratch the surface there, but, you know, really thinking through some of these hypotheticals that we actually see, right? So going back to the tornado cache and OFAC, I mean, when something is a open source, non-custodial mixer, for example, what does that mean? And that's just using that as an example of there's nuance there, right? Every company should be able to think, projects should be able to think through what bucket they want to fit into and what they are really trying to do in the industry. And I think that understanding those nuances on both sides of the fence are important. And then innovation, I agree with what's been said today, that the reason I'm so passionate about this industry is I think it is extremely innovative technology that has incredible potential that we haven't seen yet. And I think it would be really sad to see the US, you know, get left behind in that. I think that the US has, you know, prided themselves on being a leader and in some of these innovative sectors, and this should be one of them.
Before I ask the congressman his closing principle, Rachel, since you sparked this discussion on principles, where would you go on?
Yeah, so I think we all discussed access. So I would say definitely inclusion or financial inclusion should be a principle that should be always in the forefront of mind. In addition to everything that everyone has said, I completely wholeheartedly agree. But I think other two, integrity and security. I think these are, especially in the digital world.
Thank you.
Important.
And Congressman?
Well, I think that the conversation that Greg led us to, and certainly Hailey, Rachel, I agree with you too, but I think that it leads to really a concept, and that is risk tolerance. Did you know what you were buying? If you want to go and buy an AT&T, or to look at an AT&T and then look at the market in those realms, that's what you did. If you wanted to get a stock that yielded dividend, if you want to get a stock that, you know, that Dell has been for years, or any of the others, a growth stock, you were able to peg a word to that then match your, as a consumer, what you were attempting to put your money towards or to buy. And I think that this risk tolerance has a lot to do with the clarity of transparency. And that's why I think that all three of your guests that we have today, who, by the way, this was well worth my time. These three people, and yours too, Adrian, brought us to a conversation that is thoughtful. I think that the overwhelming sense is, if what I think I'm looking at transparency, it has to equal. Transparency has to equal that. And that's a hard summit to get to also, because all of a sudden, who's transparency?
Mm-hmm.
Who was counting on who to be transparent? So I well worth my time today. Made me think again a lot.
Yes,
But I like that conversation way more than, is it a security or commodity? The transparency aspect, I think that's, the shifting the dialogue and the discourse to that is something that's definitely missing on the, on the Hill and in these conversations.
Because consumer protection doesn't mean preventing consumers or investors from doing something. It means that they know the risk, and that I think that's such an important point. It means that what they're agreeing to and what they're signing up for matches the risk they're willing to take, because there are plenty of riskier things in the United States that we allow individuals to put their money into. So that's an important nuance there, is that yes, consumer protection does not mean preventing consumers. It's still supporting a free open market, but the transparency level so that consumers know what they're signing up for.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're all, I mean, as Congressman said, you guys are all awesome. You're all thought leaders in this space. And this has been an amazing conversation between all of you. And I just want to thank you, Rachel. And I want to thank you, Greg, Hailey, and also the Congressman. Everyone's insights today on the rule of law were invaluable. So the goal, as we said, the goal is to recommend good regulation without hindering innovation and development. Everyone's insights are invaluable, but also especially relevant to the goals of the Crypto Technology Advisory Group. I mean, you guys were just amazing. So, and finally, thank you to our team and the sponsors, which includes the companies you work for making this happen. And I want to give a special thanks to the audience that are going to listen and participate. We have a lot of exciting things coming up that bridge the gap between the blockchain community and government stakeholders. And also the P3 Network hosts in-person roundtables and stages this virtual content with government leaders and private industry throughout the entire world. So as a sort of last kind of pitch, the p3network.com, I want you guys to stay in touch. So stay tuned, and there'll be more to come.